Marcus Ellison was 39 years old the morning he came home from a weekend job site in Savannah to find his truck gone from the driveway and a text message waiting on his phone that said simply, "I handled it." He drove a 7-year-old work truck and wore the same steel-toed boots Monday through Saturday and kept his lunch in a soft-sided cooler his mother had given him the year before she passed. His wife Deja's friends called him Blue-Collar Marcus at dinner parties, and she laughed when they said it. A bright, easy laugh that never quite reached the place behind her eyes. That weekend, while Marcus was 40 miles away laying subfloor in a rental renovation, Deja had sold his car. Not the truck, the other one. The one he kept garaged behind the house and never mentioned. A 1971 Chevelle, fully restored, that he had spent 4 years rebuilding from a rusted frame with his own 2 hands. She had found a buyer on a Friday, handed over the keys on a Saturday morning, and used the $28,500 to fund what she later described to her sister as a well-deserved reset trip to Cancun. She did not go alone. What Deja had no idea about, what she had never once thought to ask in 7 years of marriage, was that Marcus had spent the 3 years before they met working as a licensed contractor for a private real estate investment group, and that the modest checking account she monitored was not the only account with his name on it. What happened next would cost her everything she thought she had taken. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The coffee was still warm when Marcus unlocked the side door and stepped into the kitchen that Thursday morning. He set his cooler on the counter, moved through the quiet house, and went directly to the garage. He lifted the wooden latch, swung the door open, and stood in the rectangle of morning light, looking at the empty space where the Chevelle had lived under its canvas cover for 4 years. He stood there a long time. His grandmother used to say, "The first feeling is the loudest one. Don't let it be the only one." He thought of her then, the way she had set it from the kitchen table in her house on Holman Street, her hands wrapped around a cup of chicory coffee, watching him like she already knew what kind of man he was going to become. She had been a woman who understood the value of not reacting before you understood what you were reacting to, and she had passed that understanding down to him the same way she had passed down everything else of worth in her life, quietly and without ceremony. He let the first feeling pass through him the way she had taught him. Then he went inside and made breakfast. Marcus Ellison had grown up in the Vine City neighborhood of Atlanta, the youngest son of a woman who worked 2 jobs and raised 3 boys without once letting them feel the weight of it. He had learned carpentry from his uncle Raymond, learned estimating from a foreman named Gus, who wore the same green vest every day for 11 years, and learned patience from the work itself, from the understanding that a thing built properly did not require your anger, only your attention. He had started his contracting work at 22 swinging a hammer and moved into project management by 27, and somewhere along that road he had developed a second set of eyes, the kind that noticed structural inconsistencies before they became failures, the kind that read a room the way you read a blueprint, looking not for what was there, but for what was supposed to be there and wasn't. He had carried those eyes into every area of his life. He had met Deja at a friend's cookout in the summer 6 years before. When she had walked up to the grill where he was standing and asked him what he did, he had told her he worked construction management, and she had said, "That's honest work," in a way that made him believe she meant it. She was wearing a yellow sundress and laughing at something her friend had said, and she had a quality of brightness that seemed genuine and unperformed. The kind of brightness that is either the real thing or the very best imitation. He had believed it was the real thing. They were married 14 months later in a small ceremony in his mother's backyard. The same backyard where he had built the pergola that now stood shading the table where their wedding photographs were taken, which was perhaps the only honest structure either of them had contributed to what came after. He had noticed the change in her gradually, the way a good contractor notices when a structure has begun to shift. A new perfume she wore but didn't mention buying. Texts she answered in the bathroom with the door closed, a habit that had not existed in their first 3 years together. A second charger on her nightstand for a phone he had never seen her use, a habit of going to the grocery store for a single item and coming back 45 minutes later smelling faintly of fresh air, as though she had stopped somewhere and stood outside long enough for the indoor warmth to leave her coat. He had noted each detail the way he noted everything, quietly and without comment, in the back of the mind where he kept the things that required careful attention before they required anything else. He had said nothing. He had watched. Now the garage was empty, and his phone held a text that said, "I handled it," and somewhere in the city Deja was on her way to an airport with a man whose name Marcus did not yet know, but fully intended to learn. He sat at the kitchen table, finished his coffee, and opened his laptop. He found the posting within 12 minutes. She had listed the car on a resale site 4 days earlier, using photographs he recognized from the garage. Photographs taken at an angle that told him she had come in through the side entrance and not turned on the overhead light, either to avoid leaving a trace of her presence or simply because she was in a hurry. The buyer had paid in full, a weekend transaction, clean and quick. $28,500. She had priced it at $6,000 below what any restorer who knew what he was looking at would have paid, which meant she had either not understood what she was selling or had not cared, and either interpretation told him something he needed to know. She had used the Venmo confirmation screenshot as a receipt. The buyer's profile was public. He saved every image, screenshotted the entire listing thread, and forwarded copies to his personal email before the listing could be taken down. His hands did not shake. His face remained perfectly calm. He closed the laptop and went to his home office, the small room off the hallway that Deja called his man cave with a dismissiveness he had learned to absorb without comment. He opened the filing cabinet in the bottom drawer and removed a folder he had started 8 months earlier, after the first time he had noticed the grocery store pattern and the tilted phone. In that folder were 6 months of small observations. Nothing dramatic. The kind of quiet evidence a methodical man accumulated, not out of suspicion, but out of professional habit. He was a builder. He documented. He knew from 2 decades of project work that you never acted on a single data point, that patterns only revealed themselves to the patient eye, and that the man who moved too fast on incomplete information built things that fell apart later at the worst possible moment. He added the screenshot printouts to the folder. Then he went to the second drawer, where he kept a copy of the vehicle title. His name only, his registration, his insurance. He photographed both documents with his phone, emailed them to himself, and sat back in his chair and thought carefully about what Deja did not know about the car she had just sold. She did not know that Marcus had held the title since 2019 and had never added her name to it. She did not know that in the state of Georgia, selling a vehicle registered solely to another person, without authorization, without a power of attorney, without any written consent, was not merely a civil matter. She did not know that the $28,500 sitting in her Venmo account was not hers to keep. She did not know that he had a lawyer, that the lawyer had been his lawyer for 4 years and knew everything, and that somewhere beyond the modest checking account Deja had always treated as the complete picture of his financial life, there were structures she had never known to look for, because he had never given her reason to look. He moved with the same deliberate calm that defined all of his actions. He picked up his phone and called one person. "I need to see you tomorrow," he said quietly. "Bring your case calendar and call Raymond." He made one more stop before bed. He walked to the garage, stood again in the empty space, and ran his hand along the edge of the workbench he had built from reclaimed oak the summer after his mother died. He was not a sentimental man, but he had been 4 years rebuilding that car. He had sourced the engine components himself. He had done the upholstery by hand. He had matched the original color, a deep burgundy that almost looked black in certain light, using a paint code he had tracked down through a restorer in Knoxville. The car had been worth far more than $28,500, and they both knew it. She had priced it low to move it fast. Some things, he thought, were worth the patience to build right. The next morning, Marcus sat across a wide oak desk from Patricia Cruz, a woman of 61 who had been practicing family and civil law in Atlanta for 33 years, and who had the particular quality of stillness that comes from having seen every variety of human foolishness and choosing not to be surprised by any of it. She had handled Marcus's business contracts for 4 years and his mother's estate, and she listened now with her hands folded on the desk while he laid out what he knew. He showed her the screenshots. He showed her the title documents. He described the text message. He told her the amount. Patricia did not flinch. She read each page twice, set it down, and looked at him across the desk. "Unauthorized sale of a vehicle with a clear title," she said. "In Georgia, that's theft by conversion. It's a felony charge at that dollar amount. Civil recovery is straightforward. You file for return of the proceeds, court costs, and attorney's fees. You will win." "I'm not interested in the money," Marcus said. "I know," she said. "But the money is how you get everything else." She pulled a yellow legal pad from her drawer and began writing. She told him they would send a formal demand letter to the buyer as well, not to pursue him, but to establish the chain of unauthorized transfer. She told him they would simultaneously file for a civil asset freeze on Deja's accounts pending resolution of the claim. She told him they would document the marital estate as it currently stood, because the vehicle was marital property regardless of how the title read, and the unauthorized sale without consent represented a deliberate dissipation of assets, which in Georgia divorce proceedings was a legally significant fact. Marcus listened. He asked precise questions. He did not raise his voice. Patricia looked at him with the particular expression she reserved for clients who were going to be fine. "She doesn't know what you have," she said. It was not a question. "No," Marcus said. "She does not." Real power operated in quiet rooms. That afternoon, Marcus drove across town to the house on Holman Street, where his uncle Raymond Ellison lived in the same rooms he had occupied for 40 years. A compact man of 68 with enormous hands, and the careful eyes of someone who had spent a lifetime doing work that required you to look carefully before you touched anything. Raymond listened to the story from his kitchen chair without interrupting. He poured coffee when Marcus finished. "I never liked her speed," Raymond said. "Woman that moves that fast is always moving away from something she doesn't want you to look at." He told Marcus something then that Marcus had not known. A year and a half before, at a family gathering Marcus had missed because of a job deadline, Deja had been in an extended conversation with a cousin's husband, a man named Terrence Whitfield, who worked in mortgage origination. Raymond had overheard enough to understand that Deja had been asking questions about how quickly you could liquidate jointly held assets in a divorce without the other party knowing, and how the court typically handled disputes about who owned what when the paperwork was ambiguous. He had not said anything at the time, because he had not been certain of what he heard, and did not want to start trouble on a thin maybe. He was certain now. Marcus wrote it down. He asked Raymond one question on his way out the door, whether Raymond remembered the date of the gathering. Raymond did. Marcus added it to the folder. The timeline now stretched back 18 months. She had been planning it for nearly that long. Preparation is the work. Over the following 3 days, Marcus gathered what he needed. Patricia's office pulled Deja's credit activity for the preceding 14 months and found a pattern of purchases that had no presence in their joint accounts. A travel credit card Deja had opened without disclosing, carrying a balance she had been paying from a personal account Marcus had not known about until Patricia's forensic accountant located the routing number in a credit inquiry record. Hotel charges in 3 cities, including 2 weekends when she had told Marcus she was visiting her college roommate in Birmingham. A charge from a jewelry store for a men's watch, purchased 11 months prior in a style Marcus had never worn. The total unauthorized spend across 14 months came to just over $19,000. When you added the Chevelle proceeds, Deja had moved more than $47,000 out of their shared life in a year and a half. The man's name was Kendall Pritchard. He worked in commercial leasing, drove a leased car, held a salary that sounded substantial until you looked at his credit report and found $41,000 in outstanding debt across 4 accounts. He had been divorced twice. His second ex-wife had filed a civil restraining order 18 months ago, citing financial fraud and harassment, a filing that was a matter of public record and that Patricia's paralegal located in under 40 minutes. He was, in the understated language of Patricia's summary memo, a man with a documented history of financial relationships with women who later regretted them. Deja had no idea she was the third. Marcus read the file Patricia's paralegal compiled, read it carefully and completely, and then set it aside and made dinner. He had promised Deja he would cook Thursday. He cooked. She sat across the table from him and asked about the job site, and he told her about the subfloor, and she nodded and refilled her wine, and he watched her with the same patient attention he gave everything, and she did not once suspect that the man across from her had spent the week quietly, methodically, and completely dismantling everything she thought she had built. She was performing for an audience that only existed in her own head. He kissed her cheek when she went to bed. He waited until the light under the bedroom door went dark. Then he went to his office and opened his laptop and drafted a single email to Patricia. It was time. Patricia had arranged the meeting at her office, a conference room with a long glass table and a view of the parking structure below, on a Friday morning at 10 o'clock. She had sent Deja a letter on firm letterhead stating that there was a legal matter requiring her immediate presence, and that she had the right to bring counsel. Deja arrived at 10:04 in a cream-colored blazer with the particular expression of a woman who had calculated her position and found it solid. She stopped when she saw Marcus sitting at the far end of the table. Raymond sat beside him. Patricia stood near the window. A second attorney, a colleague of Patricia's named Gwen Alcott, who specialized in criminal referral matters, sat at the side of the table with a notepad and said nothing. Deja looked at the room. She looked at Marcus. She sat down. Patricia set a manila folder on the center of the table and opened it. She did not raise her voice. She spoke at the same even volume she used for everything. She presented the vehicle title. She presented the original posting and the Venmo receipt. She presented the demand letter that had already been sent to the buyer, formally placing him on notice that the sale was unauthorized and that the proceeds were subject to legal recovery. She presented the civil asset freeze that had been filed that morning on Deja's personal accounts pending resolution. She presented 14 months of credit activity. She presented the hotel charges. She presented the jewelry receipt. She presented the timeline that ran from the conversation at the family gathering through the Cancun trip, specific dates in sequence, each one documented. Deja's expression moved through its stages. Composure, a slight tightening around the eyes. The moment she understood the depth of the table she was sitting at. "This is a mistake," she said. "I had the right to. You did not," Patricia said. "The vehicle title was held solely in Marcus's name. You had no legal authority to sell it. Under Georgia Code Section 1684, what you did meets the statutory definition of theft by conversion for amounts exceeding $1,000. That is a felony. Gwen's involvement here is to advise you that a criminal referral is one of the options currently on the table." Deja looked at Marcus. He watched her with the same quiet attention he had given everything for 39 years. "Marcus," she said, and her voice dropped into the register she had always used when she wanted something from him. "We can talk about this. I made a mistake. I panicked. I was going to tell you were in Cancun," he said. "I know, but with a man who owes 4 creditors $1,000 and whose second wife filed a restraining order on him 18 months ago." She had no idea he knew that. The calculation in her eyes faltered. Raymond spoke from his chair, the first time he had spoken since she entered the room. "Deja," he said, "don't embarrass yourself further." She turned to look at him, then looked back at the table, and something behind her expression shifted. The final adjustment of a woman understanding that the thing she had been building for 18 months had already been taken apart board by board, and there was nothing left to hold on to. Patricia slid 2 documents across the table: a civil settlement agreement for full return of the $28,500 plus court costs, and a divorce petition filed that morning in Fulton County. Marcus stood. He straightened his jacket, the same quiet gesture he made at the end of every meeting, every job site walkthrough, every conversation that had reached its natural conclusion. He looked at Deja one time with the same expression he brought to everything, clear and observational and entirely at peace. He had built things his whole life. Floors, frames, porches, foundations. He knew the difference between something worth saving and something that had been structurally compromised from the inside out. He had known that difference for a long time. "I'm not angry," he said. "I'm clear. Those are different things." He walked out of the conference room. He did not look back. Behind him the room was silent, and Deja sat surrounded by the paper record of everything she had done and everything she had not understood. And the distance between those two things was the exact shape of her situation. 9 months later, Marcus sat on the back porch of a house in a neighborhood he had moved to after the divorce. A craftsman renovation he had done largely himself over 4 months, with wide plank heart pine floors and a window in the kitchen that caught the morning light at an angle that reminded him of something he had always intended to build. The backyard held a garden he had planted from scratch, tomatoes heavy on their stakes, a row of herbs along the fence, a Japanese maple he had put in during the 3rd month that was already spreading. He had rebuilt his contracting operation in the months following the divorce, consolidating 3 long-running client relationships into a formal investment structure and taking on a 4th client, a regional developer who had been trying to work with Marcus for 2 years and who now brought him a contract worth $340,000 over 18 months. He had also located the Chevelle. The buyer, once Patricia's demand letter arrived, had cooperated immediately and fully. The car was back in the garage. He had spent 6 weekends returning it to the condition Deja's buyer had briefly disturbed. It was, if anything, better now. He had met Celeste through Raymond, as it happened, at a family dinner in the spring. She was a structural engineer for a firm downtown, A woman who asked precise questions and never filled a silence just to fill it. She was beside him now on the porch, reading something on her tablet, one leg folded under her, the morning moving slowly around them both. He had heard about Deja through the same cousin who had hosted the gathering where Raymond had overheard the conversation about divorce law. The civil settlement had been paid in full, the account freeze lifting only after the funds transferred. The criminal referral had not been pursued, a condition of the settlement. Kendall Pritchard had left the city several months after the divorce, his leasing job having ended when his employer reviewed his credit report in connection with a client complaint. Deja was working in office administration for a property management company. Her mother had not spoken to her publicly since the story made its way through the family in the way these things always did. Marcus did not gloat. He noted it. He moved on. The morning was already warm. The maple cast a thin shadow across the corner of the porch. He picked up his coffee, held it with both hands the way his grandmother had held hers, and looked out at the garden and the clean geometry of the fence he had built board by board in February, and the tomatoes that had required nothing from him except patience and the right conditions to grow. He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.